What is going on, everyone? It's your boy B, Skeletor SG, coming at you after dominating Final Fantasy VII Remake, answering some of your concerns with this new title. How much of the classic is preserved? Is the new combat system up to par? What am I getting for the price tag? Whatever reason you're here, this is Skeletor SG's Should You Buy Final Fantasy VII Remake. After so long and delay after delay, April 10th gave us the highly refined Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's been a lot of question about what the game delivers, and while the news has been out there, I want to break down some of the particulars. Up front, I'd say this iteration is maybe 75% true to the core narrative while embellishing certain details and outright changing some things. However, we do know that this title is broken into three parts, the first section delivering the Escape from Midgar block of content, which is essentially Disc 1 of the original, but it definitely takes some liberties with its ending. But for the uninitiated, Final Fantasy VII Remake follows the mercenary Cloud, hired by a cell of the resistance group known as Avalanche. This group of Avalanche is helmed by the mountainous Barrett Wallace, a gruff but pure man leading the inseparable trio, Biggs, Jesse, and Wedge, as well as Cloud's childhood friend Tifa. Brokering the job, Tifa suggests Cloud for a mission to help sabotage an energy reactor. Avalanche seeks to liberate the planet from the power-electric kind of government Shinra. Shinra uses a natural energy source known as Mako to power the industrial megaplex and setting for the game Midgard. Amongst Mako energy production, Shinra also used Mako as a means of creating super soldiers, Cloud being an ex-member of their ranks. After invading the reactor and successfully escaping, Avalanche's planned success,
but also kind of failed,
helped propel the devious plot by Shinra to bring down Midgard using Avalanche as a patsy in search of a prophesized infinite energy source. Along the way, Cloud is reunited with some classic characters from the original and a wealth of new shiny faces for new fans. The writing for this game is exceptional. The in-between conversations both in battle and as you traverse really help make each moment feel special. The voice acting team, both English and Japanese, did a fantastic job conveying the range of emotions this game and story takes our characters through. The original game was moving when we were young, but the storytelling now sets the bar high by having meaningful dialogue to help unpack the profoundly human narrative at the core of this game. If you know what happens, hell yes, but for those of you just diving into this story, I don't want to go much further, but I feel it's necessary to discuss the ending completely spoiler-free. But I definitely recommend watching 2005's Final Fantasy VII Advent Children to really kind of understand, I think, the direction they were going with this remake. However, it is pivotal to understand if you are a fan of the original, this is not a direct remake. The end is not as clear-cut than this section's transition was from the original. However, as a newcomer, I definitely see this as a potential serious head-scratcher or possibly an indescribably long cliffhanger to the next section. Regardless, like a good anime, we now have filler content that helps flesh out some of the core Avalanche gang and some of the inner workings of previous plot devices. Biggs, Jesse, and Wedge get the biggest boost in screen time, which really helps us get a deeper understanding of the auxiliary characters, but I don't want to spoil some of the great and incredibly weird moments, but 7 Remake does a lot for its supporting characters while giving us the most intimate take of our childhood heroes ever. Beyond anything, story still takes the center stage for me as one of the best reasons to play. While the main campaign is phenomenal, if you're not a fan of vapid side quests, a lot of fluff is just fluff. There's a lot of dialogue and interaction that helps you feel more connected to the story, of course, but the additional tasks and world-building quests felt just kind of like they were there just to be there. I don't feel any side quest really helped propel the narrative forward. If anything, they impeded you with some bare-bones writing and flimsy rewards. But all in all, this game has fine storytelling moments and is a captivating new take and expansion of one of the best stories told in gaming. Final Fantasy VII Remake has some extensive animations, cutscenes, side quests, and story bits to keep you occupied, but the bits in between have probably been the most decisive for fans, incorporating the live-action combat scheme of more recent Final Fantasy titles. Much of the remake you spend in linear hallways with scripted action and advancement with very little auxiliary exploration. I don't necessarily mind this, but the change of pace from the wildly open-world Final Fantasy games before this left me feeling a little cramped. Tight hallways and narrow corridors make up a good 2/3 of the traversal and action scenarios, so you often don't get to explore the rest of the world. This game forgoes the open world section of the core Final Fantasy game, and when you are given the reins to move about, you'll find yourself with a lot to look at, but unfortunately very little to do. Looking at side quests, they aren't spread out throughout the world in a natural gameplay arc, which is strange. Rather, they are optional tasks in specific chapters that offer various gameplay rewards, cinematics, and choices based on what choices you make and who you decide to help. I do like this flavor of choice and a wildly narrow and particularly planned formula. As I said earlier, side quests are pretty basic, but they range from beat up some baddies, hordes of fetch quests, and saving people from monsters. The lack of depth in these quests made them feel exclusively like a checkbox and not an actual part of the world, and these quests being chunked into specific chapters and losing access to them by going forward only helped fuel this game's feeling of being a part rather than its own whole. Whether you enjoy them or not, they helped fluff another 10 to 12 hours for my 42-hour gameplay completion. However, you can add an additional 20 to 30 hours if you plan to get the platinum. The rewards of side quests are minor, but nothing you really need to do if you're looking for a simple story playthrough. On top of actual side quests, there are also a handful of optional minigames, from destroying boxes, doing pull-ups and squats, playing darts, and a few other various ones defined throughout the chapters. Again, totally optional, but are mostly absurd and offer a great laugh and a bit of perfectionist frustration if you're trying to, say, beat Andrea at the pull-ups. It's very hard. I can't help but continue to utter fluff though. The main ingredient to this game is its story and its combat. Fans have been on the fence on the remake's new combat system since it was announced. While they offer classic mode, I played only a little bit to experience it. It felt kind of odd, especially since we've been so far removed from that combat system in recent Final Fantasies. I felt much more at home with the action-based system, regardless of its flaws. In terms of combat, I want to point out the disparity right away between the easy, normal, and hard mode. They feel like massive jumps in between, easy being mind-numbing and hard being the most frustrating nuisance ever. But my full playthrough was on normal, and there's a lot to love despite some of the bad. I personally feel when fighting basic enemies, the combat feels reactive and smooth. It's simply hit square until building up enough ATB and launch signature moves or spells. Each character has a unique triangle move, which is a cool addition. One of the best mechanics is being able to bounce back and forth between party members or launching their attacks as you function as the commander. The system is very fluid and allows for you to volley attacks very consistently. On the counter to that, if you don't command or take over, your NPC partners are basically logs and offer only their base attacks and defending themselves. The stop time function when selecting abilities in Magic is very nice and super clutch when in the thick of combat. All things considered, I enjoyed the combat pretty well. However, my biggest, and I mean biggest complaint of the core combat is the awful camera system. Whether it's a flying enemy you're locked onto, going off screen, or just you being smashed against a wall, it was just having wacky placements and would put you in consistently vulnerable positions.
Could just be me, but it was terrible.
But when you get into the meat and potatoes, the combat is dense. There are a lot of secrets the game has no desire to tell you about. It's trial and error with all characters and all builds. Each character can find 6 weapons, and each weapon has its own breakdown of stats and unique skill that the character can master. In addition, each character has 2 wearables, all that can be used for latent stats or the ever so satisfying materia system. Fans of the franchise are no stranger to the system, but materia is essentially the magic force in the game. Slotting materia allows characters to use magic like healing, fire, ice, stop time, instant death, the works. But the materia system in this game is slick. There are a ton of nuances to keep track of. Learning weaknesses and resistances that bosses have is a blast. But you level up in classic RPG fashion and are granted skill points to upgrade each of your weapons, not your character. Your SP fills for every weapon you have, so you can have fun with the variation and not needing to senselessly grind every single weapon up. Try using skills and materia that you may not think of as useful. One of the most pinnacle materia combos I found was the Magnify support materia linked with the heal. It allowed me to cast Kira on Cloud, which subsequently healed my 2 partners. On top of that, there's a customizable hotkey list for every character so you can combo your favorite skills together without ever having to stop time. but every classic spell is in the game, and the combat abilities of each character are exciting. Summons make a return, but their twist is probably the most fun auxiliary task in the game, which is helping Chadley develop combat materia. This young man uses data you provide him through natural gameplay to develop new materia and eventually summon materia that grants you access to the toughest support characters around. In classic Final Fantasy fashion, you have to whoop up on the summons before you can master their materia. Classics return like Ifrit, Shiva, and Leviathan, but the addition of Fat Chocobo and Moogle were added to feel new, I guess, but were kind of lame. I felt the summons were a bit underpowered, but they were impressive nonetheless, even if just to look at. I think one of the best elements of the game is the absolutely mad amount of boss fights present. Whether they're introducing a new creature and they give you a hulked out version to start, the boss fights keep you engaged and on your toes while also forcing the most variety out of combat. Just looking at Hell House, you have to pay attention to its auras to effectively engage and counter the monstrosity. The fights are the largest, most explosive set pieces in the game and really help expand the boxed-in feel of the game's whole. There are only a few secret bosses and some that are only available in hard mode though, so prepare for a challenge. The game can't be all gold, and I think right behind my complaint about the camera is the problem of enemies feeling like sponges. I said the in-between combat felt fluid and smooth, but some major enemies and bosses felt just like damaged sponges. You barely do anything and they deliver near one-hit kills to some party members. I don't look at that as genuine difficulty, that just is an impedance to actual gameplay. The nuisance only becomes very apparent when you realize using items in combat uses ATB, and that's a bit of a bummer. On top of that, the hard mode can be very unforgiving. Unlike normal, you can't use items at all. Hard mode also makes looking for additional treasure futile because by the time you make it to hard, money isn't really a concern and you can't use any of the items in the chest anyway. All in all, I found the combat engaging but very repetitive, and the core gameplay loop just felt like it was missing something. I don't know what that something is, but it didn't seem like a whole. It is a ton of fun, and a sense of reward is definitely there, but nothing without some heavy sighs along the way, but enough good to keep me excited for the second part. This section could easily be the longest and shortest part of this review. Shortest if I say just look and listen, the longest if I went into every detail of the game's extraordinary presentation. Final Fantasy VII Remake has one of the best soundtracks in gaming to date, and that is a fairly layered statement. In terms of the overworld music, what you hear as you travel and as you fight and experience each scenario is captivating, and the remakes of some of the famous songs from the original are spectacular in every way. But on top of that, the music you hear throughout the world as well as from vendors is awesome. The clear transition when you hear a new track is in range is smooth, and each of the songs are really catchy. My personal favorites being Hip Hop de Chocobo and Under the Rotting Pizza. On top of the extraordinary score, the sound design is phenomenal. When the camera chooses to be wonky and the lock-on has you gritting your teeth, it's the sounds behind you or the call-out from your partners that help me stay alive through some of the thick moments. The sounds are fascinating, whether you're hearing the clack of Cloud's sword on his back, the transition from stone to the ground to dirt, or the excellent cues from magical attacks. The sound design nails it in the remake. The graphics though, my word, you guys. It's hard to describe the range of feelings when it comes to this game though. The combination of the mind-blowing fidelity of the actual cutscenes, the wild particles of the magic spells and sparks of blade clashing, the in-game cinematics, or how smooth the transition from those in-game animations to combat are, there's so much to marvel at. Cloud, Aerith, and every Avalanche member, the bosses, all of that look unbelievable. So unbelievable that they make the absolutely horrendous NPCs look even worse. I can't even believe how bad some of them look. Well, most of them look. Bad facial animation, rough textures, bland clothing, and just overall models just bad. I can get past some of the lower textured environments, some of the bland backdrops, but the NPCs are pretty unforgivable when they are standing right next to the ludicrously defined Cloud and Tifa. But the main models are done very well, and they make the exceptional animations that much more exciting. From transitioning animation to combat, or even just interacting with each other, other characters in the world, there are so many beautiful animations to look at. The diversity in Cloud's stances, as well as just using limits and specific moves, is just a delight to watch. On top of that, the game has a fairly simple UI that's both pretty and fairly intuitive. I like the look of the weapon level system kind of out there in space, looking like the other Final Fantasies, but the menu displaying all of the characters is very simple and it's just very well executed and eloquent, even though sometimes it can be a little bit wonky bouncing back and forth between your weapons and the upgrades of those weapons. Overall, this is an audio-visual buffet of some of the greatest design we've ever seen in the Final Fantasy universe. The inconsistencies are pretty easy to gloss over when you watch Cloud's hair just jiggle as he slides down a staircase, or gently sway in the thrust of a combat dance. All in all, the main question comes down to, is this game worth it? Is this part enough to speak for itself as a standalone title? I think in most instances, the answer is yes. The length of the game is as long as many standalone titles in today's market, but there is something to be said about how meaningful the additions really were. In terms of the narrative, Square has brought forward the deeply human narrative at the core of Final Fantasy VII and expanded on the emotional impact in a way I didn't think the original even came close to achieving. I felt connected to the members of Avalanche and their struggle to liberate the planet from corruption, more so especially now in the backdrop of today's world. The voice acting was phenomenal and helped add a layer to really expand the characters' thoughts and feelings. The graphics and audio presentation really helped cement this narrative and convey those emotional subjects. But if your main concern wasn't the story but the gameplay, that's a hard horse to mount. I personally think the combat is great, with room to improve, but if the beta turned you off, it only gets more tough to swallow as you go on. The live combat feels smooth when you don't feel like you're against a damaged sponge or fighting the camera. Learning how to become a fluid leader is a joy to tinker with, and making your characters feel like yours is a blast. Overall, if you're on the fence, you can probably wait for this game to drop to maybe $40. The $60 price tag isn't too much to bear when you think that the Platinum will cost you maybe 60 to 70 hours. But if you're here just for the story, it's riveting when it is and a slumber when it's not. But I think the combat will be your biggest point of contention. This great game is exclusive to PS4 players for the next year, so you definitely have some time to think it over.